slaves, black slave women, and then it could be the white mistresses and how they were treated differently. And then the other one could be men were superior, but also black women slaves were more inferior to white mistresses.
Yes. So what you kind of wind up doing in each of these paragraphs is you're just like summarizing an example from the story, which isn't necessarily what I wanted you to do.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted you to use these. You have a great example, but you have to think about like the larger point that you're trying to prove. Okay. Okay, let's just say that you wanted to show that women in the slaveholding world are inferior. Okay. So in one paragraph, you could talk about like the horrors that like enslaved women had to go through. You could talk about how white mistresses had to listen to their husbands, and in the third, you could talk about how what made black slaves even more vulnerable was the fact that they not only had to put up with their inferiority to white men, but they also had to experience their inferiority to white women.
So instead of the main theme of each paragraph being an example of someone, it should be more of a subject. That was like one of the three.
Exactly. You have your evidence.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to go home and redo everything. It's just you want to make sure that each of these scenarios are proving the points that you just talked about. Because I got a lot more from talking to you than I necessarily got from your writing. Okay. So your thesis would be more along the lines of, in the slaveholding world, women had an inferior position to men. However, race was still the defining factor. Okay, so this can be seen in the separation of families and the abuse that blacks had to endure by the fact that women were completely changed by slavery because of whatever their husbands decided. And then the third, to prove that second part of your main idea, which is that it was worse for blacks because they had to also put up again with their inferiority to white women. In that third one, you would talk about the relationship between women, like Mrs. Epps and Patsy.
So the first part, women were inferior to men, and then but race still played an important role. And then explain how black women were affected and how white mistresses were.
Yeah, and then the third one, talking about the importance of race. Right, because your position is not only are they socially inferior, your position is also that they're racially inferior, which makes it worse. Right? So if that's what you're trying to prove, you have to first prove that women in general were inferior to either their husbands or to the white slave owners. And then in the last part, you have to prove that blacks were still inferior due to their race. Does that make sense?
I just don't know how to change. To use about the paragraph about Eliza, like how does that prove that black women were still inferior to their white? That would never have happened to white mistresses. Like if their entire family was separate.
Okay, so maybe rather than inferior, you could use like the wording that I even used on that. They were more vulnerable.
More vulnerable. Okay.
Exactly, to the whims of whatever white men wanted. Okay, so in the slaveholding world, women were more vulnerable than men, but race was still the defining factor. This can be seen in how slaveholding mistresses had to abide by their husbands. This can be seen in how blacks had to go through the separation of their families and things like that. And then finally, in your third paragraph, you would talk about comparing the white and black women. Okay? Because even with Ford, his wife, when Eliza gets there, remember she says, "Oh, why is she crying?" And they tell her, "Oh, well, she got separated from her family." And the woman goes, "Well, oh, that's very sad, but it'll be fixed in a little bit. She'll forget about it soon."
Okay.
Okay? That makes sense?
My thesis is that what enslaved women and mistresses were affected more negatively by slavery than
Okay, so that's kind of like the beginning part of the thesis statement. Okay, so what you need to, I should be able to read that sentence and know exactly what each of your 3 paragraphs are going to be about. So you can leave this, both enslaved women and mistresses were more negatively affected by slavery than men were, okay? As evidenced by, and then you want to list out your 3 reasons. So the 3 reasons you believe that to be true. So basically, whatever your 3 paragraphs are about, you want to list out your reasoning in your thesis statement.
Okay, so instead of like writing the 3 reasons before it, I just write it after. I mean, I don't know my third reason.
You talk about it up here too?
Yeah, I was like talking about how like the enslaved women were more negatively affected, and then how the mistresses were more negatively affected. But then for the third one,
Yeah, so for a thesis, you have to like summarize your main ideas. Okay, so both enslaved women and mistresses were affected more negatively by slavery than men were. Okay, as seen in how, and then you want to list out your 3 reasons.
okay.
Okay, so like the 3 reasons you believe that to be true.
Alright, but then for my third reason, like I didn't really know what to write about. I was just thinking about writing how they're vulnerable, but I don't know how that really connects.
This paragraph is almost more of option A. Because option A was about are whites and blacks both affected by slavery? And here you're really talking about how Mrs. Auld like changes because of slavery, and how
I mean, I don't know.
and like how cruel that they become because they have this power.